Hey guys! 2 weeks ago we had my video about the starting points in fantasy subgenres. Today it's time for the second part. So last week or 2 weeks ago we had the classics, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, grimdark, occult fantasy, portal fantasy, science fantasy, military fantasy, I have to check my notes, dark horror fantasy, political fantasy, and flintlock I think was the last one. This week, however, we'll be having, let me check, 10 other genres or subgenres of fantasy. And let's start with one of my personal favorites. I mean, at least top 5 of all the genres. It's historical fantasy, where it takes a real life period of our time and a place, of course, and introduces fantasy elements to it. A bit like alternative history, in the sense that, history is altered, of course, but it's not what could happen. Alternate history is something that could happen, realistically. Well, of course, fantasy is fantasy. And in that case, the time period is accurately represented with the magical parts that are intertwined. We all know, what's his name again? Guy Gabriel Kay. He's the king of it, with Tikana, for example, and all of his standalone novels, or most of his standalone novels, are historical fantasy. His Fiona Lark Tapestry series is high fantasy, so that's in a secondary world. But there's tons of stuff that fits in that genre. We have Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. We have George Martin's Fever Dream as well. We have tons and tons of Victorian fantasy, Victorian urban fantasy, or gaslight fantasy. For example, what's her name again? V.E. Schwab. She has this Darker Shade of Magic series going on, which I will be reading somewhere this year, I hope, which is like something to do with magics and 4 different kinds of London, I think. I haven't checked it out yet, but it will be read this year. My non-conventional recommendation, which I find a great starting point for beginners of fantasy in general as well, is actually Timidate by Naomi Novik. The series is called His Majesty's Dragon, and it's about dragons in the French-British War, in the Napoleonic Wars. I think it was 18th, 19th century, late 18th, beginning of 19th century. It's more YA-ish, but it's very wholesome, and the dragon main character is it's like a child, and it grows up during the series, or as the series progresses, and it's a very lovable character, to be honest. I enjoyed it, and it was the best part, luckily, because it's the titular character. Its name is Timidate as well, the name of the first book. Second, not so non-conventional, because it's been having some success lately. It's a City of Brass, or the complete trilogy. What's it's called again? Divabuts, I think, is the name, by Chakraborty. That's it for that. Next up is romantic fantasy, or paranormal romance. I combine those because the latter often coincides with urban fantasy, especially YA-ish urban fantasy. For example, The Mortal Instruments is a Twilight as well. Sarah J. Maas's books as well. We also have Outlander, which is very graphic. I do have to give out some warnings, in the sense that I've mentioned it's very graphic. I have read about half of the first book, and there's a lot of rape and psychotic love even. I don't like the main character, Claire, either, because she throws out childish temper tantrums, while at the same time she's in her 30s, I think, and she's seen war. She was a medic in the war, so someone that has seen such things and is already at that age throwing childish temper tantrums is just something that is But besides that, I don't really read this stuff, so I can't really give grounded recommendations. I just wanted to include it in this video I did see Kushiel's Dart, or Kushiel's, the entire series about Kushiel, enjoying some success lately, even though the books are about, what, 20, 25 years old, I can't even remember. So those might be good, I don't know. I'm not a fan of the genre in general, especially if there's a lot of smut. That said, we have two genres now that are kind of intertwined in a sense. We have progression fantasy, in where a character that begins as a weakling grows and grows and grows and grows to become an incredibly powerful character. It's like the novelization of Dragon Ball Z, actually, but, you know, with levels and that, and different books have different themes. Like, I know of a novel or a series that's in a chess theme, where they begin as a pawn and then go into a bishop and a knight and a rook and a king and stuff like that. My favorite series, and I think the most well-known series in this day and age, is of course Cradle by Will White. I'm eagerly awaiting the next book, which will be called Dreadgod. But we also have, what's his name again? John Bierce, I think is his name's Mage Errant novels. We have, of course, Mother of Learning, which the first volume actually came out only recently. That's a web serial that was bound to an actual book. It's by this Polish writer, but I can't remember his name. There's also one pick I often see is Sufficiently Advanced Magic, or the Arcane Ascension series. I personally wouldn't recommend that. I think I would recommend it in a Magical Academy series, which is something that will come up later. But I wouldn't quite recommend it in a progression fantasy series, just because the main character isn't really someone that grows very strong, I think. He acts more like the cleric slash supporter of the group, and it's more his mates, you know, his party actually, that's actually getting stronger. So I don't really recommend this as a progression fantasy, because in progression fantasy people just want their main character get stronger and stronger and stronger, which he does technically, but you know, he doesn't become this all-powerful god like, for example, Lyndon does in Cradle. And speaking of supporter and cleric and party and all that, progression fantasy also has a little offshoot, I think, or spin-off is a good word, like, you know, like the Paranormal Detective is a spin-off of the urban fantasy series or genre. We have the LitRPG, or literary role-playing game, where the world actually functions like a video game, and where the character just gets stronger by getting experience and getting levels. And there's, in most instances, we have an actual interface on the book, or, you know, in the novel, where they can see their stats and their levels and their numbers and stuff like that. The most, I think, yeah, I don't really read LitRPG either. I just wanted to include it, just as I did with the romance novels. I have read, what's the name again? The Barrow King, because I had received it for free by the author in some kind of Reddit contest, I think. It was, I'm not going to say it was great, but it was at least a solid 6 out of 10. It was good. We have The Behemoth, of course, The Wandering Inn, which is a web serial that has millions of words by now, where it's portal fantasy slash progression, because it's a woman from our world that gets transported to a video game world, which is something that actually happens a lot. Especially in anime, for example, we have the entire isekai stuff, which happens to be in video games a lot. That said, we also have He Who Fights Monsters. That's also something I have partially read, and I thought it was good, but I don't think I'll be continuing it either. It's for fans of the genre, and I don't really count myself among those. Even though I like progression fantasy, it takes me out of the immersion, I guess, having to read all those stats and levels and stuff like that. Yeah, I read The Wandering Inn until she was like, what level? I can't even remember. And so I remember the last thing she had was like a warrior level. Her class is innkeeper, but she got a warrior level. So yeah, it's been a long time, I think, because I think she's level about level 50 now, or 45 was the last thing I heard. And I don't even think I was at level 20 when I stopped reading it. Next up is Lost World Fantasy. This is something not unlike urban fantasy. It's not really set in a city, yet sometimes it is. This is about discovering an ancient lost civilization on Earth. It was very popular before the Second World War, or before the 20th century in general even, because at that time there were a lot of parts of the world that weren't discovered yet, or that hadn't been discovered yet. And there were a lot of things that they thought might be possible, but that we know now is not possible. I think most recently, the one I can remember is Michael Crichton's Congo, and that was I think it was in 1980 or something like that, around that. I don't really remember. In recent years, of course, we have The Lost Civilization, but more in sci-fi, where they discover this ancient-ish civilization, or this civilization that has low tech on different planets. Classic examples, of course, are Journey to the Center of the Earth. We have King Solomon's Mines. We have Alan Quatermain. There's a lot. I think, it began in the late 18th century. I think there were some novels already. The first one's about 200 years ago, give or take. What do we have next? I think it's Mythic or myth retellings. We have Stephen Fry's Mythos and his Troy retelling and stuff like that. We have more recently, well, not a lot more, but recently we have had Song of Achilles and Madeline Miller's Circe. We have Ariadne. We have had 1,000 Ships. We've had Daughters of Sparta. A lot of myth retellings these days is something that, I'm not judging it. It's just something that stands out to me, is where they take a myth we know, or a Greek myth that we know, and they just tell it from the perspective of one of the females, which is understandable because there's a big lack of female perspective in the Greek retellings. And it just stood out to me while researching for this video, because I haven't read a lot of them, except, what's her name again? Ursula Le Guin's version of Lavinia, and that's the Aeneid. Aeneas, he was a Trojan, he was a soldier in the Trojan War, and then he escaped to Italy after the fall of Troy, and then he became the ancestor of the Romans. And we have now the POV of Lavinia, written by Ursula Le Guin. Her writing style, it was her last novel also before she died, so it's something that I recommend, not only because she's one of the greats, but also because I think it's a great homage to her as a person. There's also Marion Zimmer Bradley's Firebrand, which was way ahead of its time. I think that one was written in 1987 or 88, and that's about, I think it's about the Trojan War, but viewed from the viewpoint of Cassandra, the daughter of King Agamemnon that was cursed to see the future, but nobody would believe her. I have that book and I will be reading it this year, but I don't really recommend it unless you can separate the art from the artist. I'm not going to go deeper into this, but you should research Marion Zimmer Bradley before reading her. That's all I'm going to say. Next up, Arcanepunk, where magic and technology clash. We have magic on one hand, we have steampunk technology on the other hand, maybe some more advanced, maybe some less advanced, but it's magic versus tech. Of course, not unlike Flintlock fantasy, to be honest, because there's tech, the Flintlock, industrial, revolutionized tech, and then we have the magic. Most famous, I think as of now, is Mistborn Era 2. and Eras 3 and 4, which will be coming soon-ish. They'll be coming in about 5 to 15 years. But yeah, we have in Mistborn Era 2, of which the last book will be revealed or will be released this Thanksgiving, or around this Thanksgiving, I think November 15th. They have magic on one hand, and they have this industrial revolution time tech, with trains and airplanes and zeppelins and guns and stuff like that. But in this case, it's not really the clash of tech and magic that's the story. In the classic one I recommend, it is. It's Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman's novels about the Dark Sword trilogy. And this is where I read this I read this in high school. I think I was 15 or 16. And this is about a young man. But this is about a young man living in a village where everyone can do magic and he cannot. And he hides that as much as he can through a sleight of hand and through tactics and through just, charm, stuff like that. But at one point he has to defend himself from an attacker, and it's revealed that he can't do magic for the life of him. So he gets exiled and he joins these outlaws called the Technologists. Not really the most creative name, but it serves its purpose. And they practice the forbidden art of silence. The title of Dark Sword is actually a weapon that can absorb magic. Yeah, I liked it. I should check, when did that one come out? The first one came out in 1987. Yeah, December 1st, 87, Forging the Dark Sword. And then the second one, Doom of the Dark Sword, was in May 1988. Triumph of the Dark Sword was in September 1988. There's also a sequel, I think, that was released. Yeah, there's a fourth book is a sequel, Legacy of the Dark Sword. But I haven't read that one yet. But I read the trilogy. They were old even then. I read it about 15 years ago. And I really love that. Joram is a great character. Well, not really great, but his development is good. But I'm not going to go into spoilers, actually. It's just that he can't do magic and he turns to science instead. That's the point. And for the last two, let me check here. Comedic fantasy. And yeah, it's fantasy comedy. And I'm just going to say what Terry Pratchett. Don't even bother reading others. Just go read Discworld. Start with Guards, I think, is the best one to start with. According to a lot of friends of mine, I've only read a few of them, of which Guards is not one of them. But yeah, I have started with the first one. Of course, I've read them in publication order, which a lot of people actually don't recommend. A lot of people recommend Mort is one of them, Mort, and Guards are the most recommended starting points in the Discord servers I'm in. So please go there, because it's very dry and it's very, very absurd even sometimes, and it's very whimsical. Yeah, if you like comedy and if you like a light read, it's great. And the novels aren't that long either. And most of them are standalones. I think there's only 1 or 2 true sequels in the entire Discworld series, which consists about, I think, 42 books, something like that. So yeah, please just read Terry Pratchett. It's one of Brandon Sanderson's greatest inspirations as well. So yeah, he'll be great. I cannot recommend it enough. The penultimate subgenre I will be recommending is the Magic Academy series. We all know Harry Potter. A lot of us know the Magicians as well from the show. I can't remember which channel it was on, but from the show. More recently, or something that I personally enjoyed very much, was Brandon Sanderson's The Arithmetist, which is about a kid that's in a magic academy but can't do magic himself. Yeah, it sounds strange, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you read the book. There's also The Scholomance by Naomi Novik. It's more YA-ish as well. It's called A Deadly Education, is the first novel. There's a sequel out already, and the third one will be released, I think, next year or in 2 years. So maybe wait until the entire trilogy is out. I don't know, but if you want to, you can read the first 2 books already. Last but not least, there's superhero fiction. And I don't have to tell you about the comics, of course. You know, we have, Marvel and DC, duh. The end all, the be all and end all of superhero comics, Marvel and DC. You know, the popular ones are Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Avengers. Actually, the every hero that has received a Marvel movie, but they're great. And there's the most famous superhero fiction. More recently, we have George R.R. Martin's Wild Card series, which is not really fantasy. It's kind of sci-fi, kind of fantasy. Same thing with the other series I'm recommending, actually. That's Brandon Sanderson's Reckoner series, which consists of what I think it's 3 novels and 2 novellas. I think there's Mitosis and Lux as novellas, and then there's I can't remember how they call it in English. I think it's I read them in Dutch, and I think it's Steelheart. In Dutch, it was the translation of flamethrower, but I think in English it's actually firefight or firefighter. And then we have Calamity as a third one. I breezed through them in about a week, I think. Same for Wildcards, even though they're more dense than the Reckoners, they're not long books either. I think I think they're about 120,000 words. But I read the first 2, and I really enjoyed them, even though they're keeping George Martin from, you know what. I'm not going to mention, but you know, I did enjoy it, even with that in my mind, in the back of my mind. That's it, guys. That was it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, like and subscribe, or leave a comment, or recommend me something inside one of these genres that not a lot of people know, or that a lot of people know but don't know it's actually applicable to this genre. But for now, guys, have a nice day. Mission accomplished.